This episode of The Reality Check is brought to you by HelloFresh. Forget takeout. HelloFresh delivers all the ingredients for delicious, healthy meals anyone can prepare at home in less than 30 minutes. And HelloFresh is giving our Canadian checkers 50% off their first order. Go to hellofresh.ca and use promo code REALITY50 to get 50% off your first order. That's hellofresh.ca, promo code REALITY50. This is your reality check.
Hi everyone, and welcome to The Reality Check, the weekly Canadian show that explores a wide range of controversies and curiosities using science and critical thinking. This is the show for September 19th, 2017, and I'm your host, Darren McKee. With me, as usual, are Adam Gardner.
What's up, Q-Voids?
Christina Roach.
Hello.
And producer Pat.
Hi, everyone.
We have a great show for you today. Pat is going to look into whether a human being can survive being swallowed by a whale. Christina is going to explore breast thermography and some related problems. And Adam is going to look into the Voynich Manuscript. But first, I want to quickly talk about Stanislav Petrov. Stanislav Petrov was a lieutenant colonel in the Soviet Air Defense Forces who became known as the man who single-handedly saved the world from nuclear war for his role in a 1983 Soviet nuclear false alarm incident. I'm mentioning this because the incident occurred on 26th of September 1983, which will be coming up by the time you hear this, and some people think we should have a Petrov Day. I encourage you to read more about it, but the gist is they thought, the Soviets, that the Americans had launched an attack, and he thought, nah, I think that's a false alarm, and he was told to act, as in launch in response, and he didn't.
Oh, wow.
So some people say he was just doing his job, some people say he wasn't doing his job. He thinks he didn't really do anything, and apparently he was reprimanded later because he didn't make good enough notes. He's like, I had both my hands free, I didn't have a third hand.
Yeah.
Anyway, this man probably helped avert a nuclear war. Thank you, Stanislav.
Mm-hmm. Didn't he recently die?
Well, he died actually earlier in the year, about 5-6 months ago, although people just didn't find out about it until September. Possibly thanks to Petrov, humanity has survived this long, but would a human survive being swallowed by a whale? Pat, what's the deal?
Okay, the setup for how I got to this topic will take a minute. It has to do with two popular YouTube shows. First, a show called Hot Ones. I know Cristina is a fan. Darren, Adam, have you ever seen it?
I have not.
I have not.
Okay. Well, if you haven't seen it, you might want to give it a try. Host Sean Evans asks usually really well-researched questions of his celebrity guests, and between each question, both eat a chicken wing prepared with a progressively hotter hot sauce.
Okay.
They range from around 2,000 Scoville units to the final sauce, which is usually over 500,000 Scoville units. He's had on people like Kevin Hart, Ricky Gervais, Bryan Cranston, Kevin Durant, Redman, and of particular interest to checkers, a really, really great episode with Neil deGrasse Tyson.
Highly recommend.
Cool. So the second is a YouTube channel called Brave Wilderness. It's hosted by Coyote Peterson, who is sort of a current-day Steve Irwin the crocodile hunter. Even though it's only about 10% of his content, he's likely best known for videos where he lets the insects with the most painful stings, according to the Schmidt Pain Index, sting him. These I find a little bit harder to watch. At the end of the last season of Hot Ones, Sean Evans had on none other than Coyote Peterson. And I thought the most interesting question and answer was this. What is the thing your viewers ask you for the most? To which Peterson replies, getting eaten by a whale. Everyone wants to see the old Pinocchio. So he likely means being swallowed by a whale. And I got to wondering, could you actually be swallowed by a whale? Or has it already been done? We are likely all familiar with the fictional story of Pinocchio and the biblical story of Jonah. And then there's James Bartley, who is the central figure in a story which began to appear in American newspapers in the late 1800s. He was supposedly swallowed whole by a sperm whale and found alive the next day in the stomach of the whale, which was dead from constipation. Supposedly his skin had been bleached by the gastric juices, and he was blind for the rest of his life. Historian Edward Davis investigated the story and found a bunch of inconsistencies. While the ship in this tale, the Star of the East, did exist and sailed during the time of the alleged incident, it was not a whaling vessel, and Bartley was not on the crew list. Also, the wife of the captain of the Star of the East wrote in a letter, quote, "There is not one word of truth in the whale story. I was with my husband all the years he was on the Star of the East. The sailor has told a great sea yarn." There are many other tales of people being swallowed by whales, but in a 2012 article for Salon, writer Ben Shattuck did a pretty deep dive on this, pouring through the records of the Whaling Museum Research Library, and he failed to find a single report of anyone ever being swallowed alive by a whale. All right, so could a whale swallow you whole? The answer is mostly no.
Oh.
Many whales' esophagi or esophaguses, I read that both are actually acceptable, are very small, measuring only a few inches across. Even a blue whale's esophagus is less than 10 inches across.
Really?
Most of what I saw on this, and there's actually quite a bit out there on it, agree that there is one whale that could probably swallow a person whole, and that is the sperm whale. We know the sperm whale can swallow large prey, and apparently they're able to swallow giant squid whole, so chances are they could certainly swallow a human. But the next question is, could you survive? The answer to this part is not likely. If you made it through the being swallowed part, including getting past the teeth, which are described as being about the size of long steak knives, then you're into the digestive system. Now, sperm whales have a 4-chambered stomach, so you're going to be there for a bit, and the stomach acid would make quick work of you. But it's very likely you'd be dead before you got there because, well, there's no oxygen.
Yeah.
Some people point out that you could be wearing scuba gear, but you'd need enough air to breathe until you'd get out of the whale, and then there's that previously mentioned stomach acid. So there you have it. It doesn't seem like anyone has ever been swallowed whole by a whale and lived to tell the tale, and it's pretty implausible it could ever happen.
So let's say you did have scuba gear with a good enough tank, and it was sort of made out of a material that didn't get digested. Would the whale even be able to pass a full-sized person, or would you just kind of get stuck at some point if you don't get broken down?
I think the answer is that, Adam. If the whale couldn't break it down, it wouldn't be able to pass it, right?
Yeah.
Thanks, Pat. I'm sure you've disappointed many swimmers. And now, Cristina, tell us more about breast thermography and what might be the problems with it.
A few days ago, I saw a couple of related tweets come through our @TRC_podcast Twitter feed that were disconcerting, to say the least. One was from Tim Caulfield, host of A User's Guide to Cheating Death. The other from @HealthWatch123, who posts healthcare news and is a watchdog of treatment claims from the complementary and alternative medicine world, or CAM for short. Here's @HealthWatch's tweet. Ontario #chiropractor hosting thermography clinic to detect cancer? Where's the regulator? @CDN Min Health. By the way, @CDN Min Health is the official account of Canada's Minister of Health, the Honourable Marie-Jeanette Petitpas-Taylor. Along with the tweet was a screenshot of a FB page, or Facebook page, from Oswell Chiropractic Clinic in Elmer, Ontario. They're hosting a thermography medical clinic for breast cancer screening. Now, Caulfield's tweet was along the same vein. Indefensible. #chiropractic clinic marketing of thermography. See @Health Canada position via @HealthWatch123. Now, Caulfield includes a link to a page on Health Canada's website under recalls and safety alerts, posted in November 2012. So just keep that in mind. That's about 5 years ago. Now, before I dive into what's at that link, let me give you guys some background on thermography and this clinic's claims. According to Wikipedia, infrared thermography, IRT, thermal imaging, and thermal video are examples of infrared imaging science. Thermographic cameras usually detect radiation in the long infrared range of the electromagnetic spectrum and produce images of that radiation. Those are called thermograms. So when viewed through a thermal imaging camera, warm objects stand out well against cooler backgrounds. Humans and other warm-blooded animals become easily visible against the environment day or night. And as a result, thermography is particularly useful to the military and other users of surveillance cameras.
I believe the Predator uses that to see the humans. That's why Arnold Schwarzenegger puts the mud on himself.
But isn't that just night vision stuff? which could be the same thing.
He's got a bunch of
No,
options.
night vision amplifies ambient light when thermography uses heat signatures, I believe.
Oh, okay.
Now, here's a cool fact. Government and airport personnel used thermography to detect suspected swine flu cases during the 2009 pandemic. Now, Thermography Medical Clinic is holding clinics in a bunch of cities around Ontario in the coming weeks. TMC is run by someone named Sharon Edwards, who claims to be a registered homeopath, natural health practitioner, there's Adam, and registered nutritionist. She is the clinical director of Divine Living, D''Vine, a natural health clinic, and the Thermography Medical Clinic. Now, on their site, they say, breast thermography is a screening tool that helps to identify early indicators of potential breast abnormalities. Thermography is a safe, non-contact, non-invasive test that does not damage cells or DNA and takes less than 30 minutes. Thermography can aid in the detection of the following potential conditions: breast cysts, lymphatic congestion, estrogen dominance, generalized inflammation, fibrocystic breasts, hormone imbalances. Now, according to TMZ's website, and bear with me as I tried to condense their description as much as possible, but still give you guys enough info to get the gist. Thermography is a simple test of physiology that relies on the sympathetic nerve control of skin blood flow and the ability of the sympathetic nervous system to respond to and react to pain, pathology, injury, or dysfunction anywhere in the body. By using the most advanced infrared cameras and our patented, there's that magic can't possibly be peer-reviewed word, image capture and analytical software, Thermography Medical Clinic staff can accurately measure the temperature at every single point of the human body. The role of body temperature as a very good indicator of health and wellness has been known since the time of Hippocrates, as changes of just a few degrees on skin, cutaneous or superficial, can be used as an indicator of inflammation and possible illness. So this is one of their big selling points. They can diagnose inflammation, which they suggest is a prime indicator of illness.
And do they suggest curing that with some bloodletting or something equally
Yeah,
classical?
yeah, exactly. Yeah, hello, causation, correlation. Now, by accurately measuring temperature regions and identifying thermographic patterns, thermography detects inflammation often long before symptoms may be felt or eventually diagnosed with an actual disease.
This is still
Their quote, sorry. Now, they actually have the cojones to say on their website under a section called the mammogram mistake. By carefully examining changes in the temperature of blood vessels of the breasts, signs of possible cancer or precancerous cell growth may be detected up to 10 years prior to being discovered using any other procedure.
Oh my.
Now, I'll pause here before I read the last sentence of that paragraph on their site, because I just want to point out that they employ an often used tactic, including a link to a respected source of scientific or medical information or study to somehow legitimize their claims, which is very misleading. For instance, TMC says, quote, "The increasing consensus on the role of inflammation in disease development was recently discussed in a note produced by the Mayo Clinic." That's true. They link to the July issue of Mayo Clinic Health Letter highlighting inflammation's role in cardiovascular disease. Okay, TMC, I see what you did there. But nowhere does Dr. Brent Bauer, General Internal Medicine and editorial board member at the Mayo Clinic, suggest that thermography is a viable treatment. He actually says right in that letter they link to, quote, "At present, it's still too early in the science to reasonably conclude that reducing inflammation leads to a reduction in cancer risk. Many of the questions concerning cause and effect with cancer have yet to be proven." So this really grinds my gears because these guys are preying on people's insecurities and fears by pushing the notion literally. They have this quote, "An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure."
Which is kind of true in many contexts.
Depending
True.
what you're doing, depending if what you're doing is evidence-based. Like, yeah.
Well, right. No, you take a true sentence and you just stick it in a situation
Right.
that is not as applicable.
Yeah.
Exactly. Now, here's an excerpt of something Oswell Chiropractic Clinic, who is hosting one of these TMC clinics, posted. Breast thermography is a breakthrough imaging procedure where infrared images of the breast are analyzed and rated to determine the risk of developing breast cancer. Then, in bigger font and in bold at the bottom of the page, breast thermography is an indispensable method of breast assessment and breast cancer risk evaluation. Here is the biggest problem with that statement. No, it isn't. Science-Based Medicine's Jan Bellamy posted an article in April titled FDA Issues Warning Letter to Holistic Practitioner Offering Thermography for Breast Cancer Detection. Bellamy cites SBM's breast cancer expert Dr. David Gorski, who pointed out a couple of things. There are no baseline measurements of sensitivity and specificity. There are no widely agreed upon standards for test performance and interpretation. There's the potential for overdiagnosis and overtreatment, even if, as promoters claim, lesions are detected 5 to 10 years before mammography. Even as an adjunct, thermography doesn't provide any information that a breast MRI doesn't provide and provide better. Bellamy goes on to say that the American Cancer Society, the American College of Radiology, and the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists do not recommend thermography for breast cancer detection.
Well, it's because it's cutting into their business.
Yeah, right. In fact, according to the American Cancer Society, quote, thermography failed to detect 3 out of 4 cancers that were known to be present in the breast. Digital infrared thermal imaging, which some people believe is a newer and better type of thermography, has the same failure rate. Now, United Healthcare in the US issued a new medical policy on thermography after reviewing all the available evidence and concluded, quote, there is insufficient evidence to conclude that thermography has a beneficial impact on health outcomes. The available evidence is limited and weak, and standards for image evaluation and cutoff values that would allow clinical recommendations based on this technology have not been established. So getting back to Caulfield's link, I'd like to read you what Health Canada posted about thermography. Thermography machines not authorized to screen for breast cancer. Health Canada is advising Canadians and healthcare practitioners that no thermography, thermal imaging machines have been approved to screen for breast cancer in Canada. Health Canada is not aware of any clinical evidence that thermography can be used effectively as a screening technique for the early detection of breast cancer. As such, it may present a potential risk to women relying on the results. Patients who have relied on these types of machines for breast cancer screening should contact their physician for appropriate follow-up and testing. So not only is it not an indispensable method of breast assessment and breast cancer risk evaluation, it is actually illegal to advertise or sell these types of machines to screen for breast cancer in Canada. And unfortunately, they are not the only place advertising thermography. A 5-second search, I found another Toronto-based clinic, thermographyclinic.com, making similar claims. So imagine for a moment this is your mom, your sister, daughter, partner, putting their faith in this procedure. It is despicable. Now, if you're in the US, the rules are a bit different. According to the Center for Inquiry, quote, websites promoting thermography often mention that the procedure has been approved by the FDA, but they fail to explain that the approval is awarded based on the non-invasive and therefore presumably safe nature of the procedure. It is not an endorsement of efficacy. I guess this is what we go through when we talk about homeopathic or, that type of medicine, right?
It's safe, but it just doesn't do anything, right?
Right. In 2011, the FDA, alarmed by misleading advertising, issued several warning statements, including statements such as, the FDA is concerned that women will believe these misleading claims about thermography and not receive needed mammograms. In the meantime, here in #We the North territory, Health Canada is working with the Canada Border Services Agency to stop any unlicensed devices from entering Canada and communicating with provincial and territorial ministries of health. But to @HealthWatch's point about where's the regulator? Where is the regulator? How the hell are these clinics able to proliferate and advertise publicly? As CFI says, without appropriate oversight, these clinics will continue to exploit vulnerable Canadians. Now, as I mentioned earlier, over the next several weeks, TMC will be holding clinics in various cities. I've included a link to their events page in the show notes so you can check out where. Checkers, this is a call to arms. You can make a difference here. Health Canada is asking that any complaints involving thermography machines being promoted for the use of breast cancer screening can be reported to the Health Products and Food Branch Inspectorate by calling the toll-free hotline 1-800-267-9675. Now, I called that line and left a voicemail about these clinics and was pleasantly surprised to get a call back a couple of hours later from a regional regulatory compliance and enforcement officer. He told me the best thing to do is to go online and fill in a health product complaint form, aka FRM-0317, which is specific to medical devices, and that would trigger them to investigate. So please check out the show notes for that link, especially if this is happening where you live.
Well, it's just upsetting. I mean, a false positive is terrible, and a false negative is life-threatening.
And there are already enough problems with like mammograms as they are, right?
Right.
And it sounds like from what Cristina said, at least in the 3 out of 4 that you mentioned, a false negative is more likely, which is, as you say, life-threatening.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Unfortunately, one of the websites, I think it was the thermographyclinic.com one, also had statements, reviews, whatever you want to call them, from patients regarding their experiences with thermography, and it's just really, really sad to me that people are allowed to get away with this kind of stuff and mislead people.
Well, I think this is one of those scenarios where the people who are been trained and sold the machines actually probably do believe that they're very cutting edge and that this works and it's non-invasive. Unfortunately, they're just ill-informed.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, never ascribed malice what you can ascribe to ignorance.
This is it.
Right.
Still, horrible and annoying, and please, everyone, try to get engaged and reduce this practice. At least just tell people that this is not legitimate science. And now, Adam, the Voynich Manuscript. I'm not sure if it's important, but I look forward to finding out.
It's also about women's health, potentially. The Voynich Manuscript has been making a few headlines recently. And before I get into the recent developments, I'll give a bit of background on what this odd document is, because I imagine some of you may not ever have heard of it. The Voynich Manuscript is an ancient text accompanied by images of unknown origin, which is named after Wilfrid Voynich, a book dealer who acquired it in 1912. There are roughly 240 pages, though there is evidence that some are missing. The text is written in an unknown language or code, and it reads from left to right. Most pages have illustrations on them. Many people have attempted to translate or decipher the contents without any success. Not only is it of an unknown language, but the distribution of letters amongst what is considered to be words doesn't fit with patterns known to most languages. The words have irregular structure, and the letter distribution is very strange. The images found within are broken into sections, which are referred to as follows: herbal, astronomical, biological, cosmological, pharmaceutical, and recipes. Now, these aren't words used in the book. These are sort of what people called them based on what the images look to be grouped together as.
It's interesting how recipes kind of stands out as one of these things is not like the other.
A bit. Now, there's much speculation about what it was and what it says, but until now, none of these can be independently verified. The manuscript is currently in the Yale University's Voynich Rare Book and Manuscript Library. Though many assumed it to be faked, possibly by Wilfrid Voynich himself, numerous carbon datings have placed the document between 1404 and 1438. So it doesn't sound like it's a forgery, or if it is some sort of forgery, it's a really old forgery and it's still interesting. Its history can be dated fairly far back, as it was a curiosity as far back as its first confirmed owner, George Baresh, who had it in 1585. But he didn't have any better idea of what it was about than modern scholars do, so the mystery continues. So here are a few ideas on what the manuscript's language is about. Some say it's a cipher, so it would be a letter-based cipher, more complicated than a simple one-to-one letter substitution. That would have been pretty easy to figure out. Some say it might be codes, so similar to a letter-based cipher, but instead you have a word that would substitute with a different word, but then there would need to be some sort of key to decipher it. That key is not known to exist, if that's even what it is. It could also be a form of shorthand that just wasn't adopted elsewhere with enough frequency to be relevant or to be known historically. It could be steganography. Now, the idea here is that there would be some message hidden in the text that could exist even though most of the text could be gibberish. So, for example, every third letter of each word put together reads some message. Well, the rest doesn't really matter, but nothing's really been determined in that way. Some say it could be a natural language, that being a language which evolved naturally and that was used, just one that wasn't used for long or wasn't used widely enough for anyone to be able to recognize it. Alternatively, it could be a constructed language, so someone may have invented a language that was just not adopted frequently enough for anyone else to use it. And it could be a hoax. So a method called the Cardan grill could be used to generate text which seems like language, much like the text that is seen in this manuscript. But this method wasn't invented until some 100 years later after the manuscript had been dated. So that doesn't really make a ton of sense, but it is somewhat plausible. It could also be a glossalala. This is basically speaking in tongues, but in a language that isn't real. So if a person is speaking in tongues, there's sort of this stream of consciousness, and then they write it down, and it comes out like this. Researchers consider this to be unlikely just due to the form that the text takes. So, what's the news? What's going on? There was a lot of buzz a couple of weeks ago as professional history researcher Nicholas Gibbs announced that he'd found the solution to the manuscript.
Wow.
I also like the phrase. Like, historians are professional history researchers.
This is what he calls himself.
I know, but that's why you don't usually hear people say that way.
That's what he says. So there are really two main ideas that Nicholas Gibbs is putting forth. One is what the images represent, and the other is, based on what those images would represent, what the script could mean. So much to say, he could be right about the images, but way off about the script, or way off on both, or potentially right about both. So first, what does he say about the images? Gibbs mentions that he's also a muralist and war artist with an understanding of the workings of picture narration. Well, Nick, I've read my fair share of comic books from many continents, so I'm no stranger to picture narration myself. Want me to have a crack at any of this stuff?
I would say Adam's also seen animated movies and made some, so who's the authority now?
Yeah. Gibbs makes reference to classical physicians ranging from the 5th century BC to the 2nd century AD, which is far from the 15th century, which the Voynich Manuscript has been dated to. He determines that, based on the images included, that its content likely relates to health and medicine. Now, bathing is a common theme in the manuscript, which Gibbs states was considered to be a remedy at the time, which was advocated from the classical physicians he mentions right into the Middle Ages. Pictured throughout are naked female figures immersed in some concoction or another. Aside from bathing, they can also be seen drinking the water. There's also a great deal of information about plants and the zodiac. Plants would have been suggested for their medicinal benefits, and, at the time, zodiacs would also have been something which were considered to be related to health. It's not true, but as long as people believe it, it's plausible that that could be the reason for the manuscript. He believes that another set of documents known as the Trotula was the inspiration for many illustrations in the Voynich Manuscript. These were 3 12th century Italian texts on women's medicine. They were conditions of women, treatments of women, and women's cosmetics. They were at their greatest popularity in the 14th century, not long before the Voynich Manuscript. He also found similarities with the manuscript De Balnae Puteolanis from around 1220. So what does all of this say? Basically, going only on the images and not even dealing with the text, he believes that the Voynich Manuscript is about women's health. More specifically, it would be a reference book of selected remedies, which is mostly copied or based on other works available during the period. He believes that it contains instructions for the health and well-being of upper-class women, or more specifically, that it may have been written with one single woman in mind. This gave him a clue as to what the text meant. He claims that 2 of the characters are Latin ligatures, aegis and etiam. So these are a sort of scriptorial shortcuts. They're selected letters of a word which together represent a whole word. He gives the example of the ampersand, which is a combination of letters E and T, the Latin et being the word for and. I'm probably mispronouncing that. My Latin is non-existent. Realizing this, he consulted the Lexicon Abbreviaturarum of medieval Latin from 1899 by Andriano Capelli. He believes that each character in the Voynich Manuscript represented an abbreviated word, not a letter. So he translated it? Well, he includes a couple of lines of text and the translation in Latin. And he also believes that there is an index, which is the key to the abbreviations, which is missing, so there's no easy way to cross-reference most of the text. So he believes that's what it is, but he can't really decode everything. So, what's the problem with this interpretation? The idea that this could be a medical document on women's health isn't actually a new idea. Many others have studied the manuscript and have come to this conclusion before, so Nicholas Gibbs isn't making any new discovery here. So he might be right about that, he might be wrong, can't really be proven until you know what the text says. Nice idea, though. As for the translation, which is sort of the big thing that he's discovering here, experts kind of say it's junk. Medieval Academy of America director Lisa Fagan Davis says, and I quote, "They're not grammatically correct. It doesn't result in Latin that makes sense. Frankly, I'm a little surprised the TLS published it. If they had simply sent it to the Voynich Library, that's where the manuscript is housed, they would have rebutted it in a heartbeat." So perhaps if Ars Technica's knowledge of Latin extended beyond their pretentious title, they would have caught it before publishing their first less than critical article on the subject.
Oh, snap!
Ooh.
So he's taking only a couple of lines, making some guesses at words, and putting together a few grammatically incorrect Latin sentences. It seems like anyone could do this with any text or string of characters. And this reminds me a bit of the Bible code, where people pour through texts such as the Bible to find hidden messages. As we demonstrated on our show when guest Lee Graham was on back in episode 36 to discuss this topic, algorithms can be used to find almost any short message encoded in the Bible or other texts given there are enough pages to work with. Using pages of text from the Voynich Manuscript and no constraint on proper grammar, one likely wouldn't have a terribly hard time throwing together a couple of broken sentences based on strings of symbols. To be fair, I haven't actually done the statistical analysis or tried to make sentences out of these strings of characters, but I don't think this idea has been demonstrated thoroughly at this point. If Gibbs's theory is correct, this could be proven by correlating enough symbols to words, and being able to correctly predict the content of many other pages that hadn't even been looked at. It does not seem that this has happened, and we'll have to see where this goes. Lisa Fagan Davis also mentions that the missing index is purely of Gibbs's invention. There's no evidence it exists, and though it's true that a few pages are missing, we have no reason to believe that an index is part of them. It doesn't really seem to be referenced anywhere. The solution to the Voynich manuscript has not likely been found. Nicholas Gibbs believes, based on the illustrations in the manuscript, that it contains instructions for the health and well-being of women, but this general idea is not new and not uniquely believed by Gibbs. This may indeed be roughly what the document was for, and it may not. As for the very specific claims about individual letters being ligatures representing Latin words and that he can determine the content of the text from them, this seems unlikely. The couple of examples of translations which he has provided are not grammatically correct Latin, so these odd sentences may be cherry-picked and meaningless. The Voynich manuscript remains a real mystery, which has challenged scholars for over a century and may continue to challenge some for years to come, till we create a super-intelligent artificial intelligence which figures it out for us, or time travel.
I have to say, Adam, I've never heard of this, and that's super interesting.
Yeah, so if you're interested in the Voynich manuscript, there's some links in the show notes at trcpodcast.com. You can actually look at the whole thing. They have scans of it in a number of places.
I will look for that great website to find that other website. Thank you, Adam. And thanks for joining us once again. I hinted you might want to celebrate Petrov Day. Pat sadly told me that I will not be able to be eaten by a whale whole and survive. Something's not going to go right somewhere. Cristina warned us of the dangers of breast thermography. This is not legitimate science. Don't think it is such. And Adam investigated the Voynich manuscript, which still needs to be explained. Until next time, think better to act better.
Peace out, Q-Voids.
Stay classy, not smart-assy.
Good night, everyone.
For show notes or to discuss this episode, visit our Facebook page and website at trcpodcast.com. For general inquiries or to send a topic or parody suggestion, email info@trcpodcast.com. Help support the show by leaving a review on iTunes and liking us on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter at @TRC_podcast.
Outtakes.
Are you guys done?
Actually,
I
This is like
literally am keeping this in a vault in case
This is like a rich tapestry to explore. Actually,
This goes in your secret files.
the blackmail files.
Like if I ate a mouse that was wearing scuba gear, like really, I don't.
Let's just enjoy this for a moment.
Yes.
This little mouse scuba gear,
sit back.
little tank,
I don't
little
see
flippers.
myself.
elucidated, explained.
I have to look up elucidated and then I'll let you know.
Elucidated. Elucidated is a fancy word that means explained.